evening, everyone. It is so exciting for me to welcome you back to our History Happy Hours, which closed down exactly 2 years ago. Yeah. Amazing to see you all in person again. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the executive director of the museum. The museum is here to build community through supporting cultural arts activities that are primarily community driven. So you come to us with great ideas, and we help you put them on to the public. So anybody have great ideas? You are welcome to catch up with us. So I'm actually not going to introduce the program this evening, but I'm thrilled to introduce you to our new community programs coordinator, Leslie Rose, who is going to introduce you to the program.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone for today's History Happy Hour. Yes, welcome back. Tonight we welcome Dr. Alla Shapiro to the museum for the presentation of her memoir, Doctor on Call, Chernobyl Responder, Jewish Refugee, Radiation Expert, published in 2021. We are really thankful to have Dr. Shapiro here to share her incredible and timely story with us today. And during the last 10 minutes of the program, she will be taking questions from both the in-person and the online audience. For my online audience, feel free to add your questions in the chat throughout the program, and we will present them during the Q&A portion. Sandy Spring Museum organized on its program because we are committed to working towards dismantling systemic issues that impact marginalized communities in our society. We believe it is critical that museums are part of the conversations to address the historical and current injustices in our nation, to celebrate communities that are too often under-recognized. Through Sandy Spring Museum's programs, exhibitions, and collections, we are taking actions to address histories of erasure, create community understanding through the arts, and build a more equitable future. Now, before I introduce our speaker for the evening, I wanted to present a collection of items from Sandy Spring Museum archives, which speak to similar experiences of displacement and the importance of finding community. Within our archives, there's a group of letters that shed light on the plight of Jewish sympathizers in pre-war Nazi Germany. This collection documents the sponsorship by Sandy Spring resident Esther W. Scott of a German Quaker family for immigration to our area. Fritz Geisler, a lifelong Quaker from Kassel, Germany, was ousted from his teaching position and lost his livelihood within days of the National Socialists taking power in 1933. By 1937, he and his Swiss wife, Marty, along with their 2 children, sought passage to the United States with the help of the American Friends Service Committee. These letters document the challenges, frustrations, and occasional heartache of navigating a myriad of obstacles in this pursuit. There are a number of letters between Fritz and Marty Geisler, the American Friends Service Committee member Herta Kraus, and Esther Scott. The letter that's on screen details Fritz Geisler's response to the news that there was a safe place for his family to live and work at Sandy Spring. I have pulled this excerpt from the letter, which reads, "After having thought about it one night, we are just as much decided to come yesterday as we received the letter. I am very happy to come to Sandy Spring, where I found dear friends, so that I shall not be a complete stranger there." The Geisler story of discrimination, endangerment, and displacement is a story that many people across the globe can relate to. It is wonderful to see Sandy Spring, as described in these letters, as a safe and welcoming community. Okay. Let me just make one more. Okay. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Alla Shapiro to Sandy Spring. Before we begin, let me briefly introduce you to tonight's featured author. Dr. Alla Shapiro, a pediatrician and hematologist in Kiev in the 1980s, was one of the first physician responders to the worst nuclear disaster in history, the explosion at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station in Ukraine on April 26, 1986. Chernobyl changed her life and career forever. Within a few short years, she and her family left the Soviet Union, became Jewish refugees, and immigrated to the United States. From 2003 to 2019, Dr. Shapiro worked at the Office of Counterterrorism and Emergency Coordination at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She focused on facilitating the development and availability of medical countermeasures against radiation exposure. Motivated by her experiences as a physician responder at Chernobyl, Dr. Alla Shapiro became one of the world's leading experts in developing drugs against radiation exposure. Tonight, Dr. Shapiro will share excerpts from her memoir, Doctor on Call, Chernobyl Responder, Jewish Refugee, Radiation Expert. Can we give her a round of applause, please?
This is for you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me and coming here to listen to my stories. And as Leslie suggested, I will be on time, 40 minutes max, and then 10 minutes Q&As. And I expect one of the questions would be if I'm going to write another book, and the answer is no, so please don't ask me that. I promise to all my editors, no more books. And usually the second question from my past presentations in past 2 months, whether you guys have to have potassium iodide in your household. So if this question arises, I will answer, of course. Okay, so when I saw this history happy hours, I immediately realized that my topic does not completely match happy hour, but I still tried to fit the topic into this frame. So I added few funny images here, and each of them has its own story, and I will comment on each of them as we go. So on the far right, this is not funny, the first one. When you look at this, you could probably see that it's Mars rover exploration mission, but it's not. What you're really seeing is the sarcophagus which covered the unit that blew up during the disaster. And the construction was built with the holes in it, and the purpose was to let the air go through, so ventilation is better. At the same time, the holes allowed the radioactive particles to spread. So this was not a very good architectural design, but it's getting better now, and the less probably to the final. Oh, you can hear. Okay, I'm sorry. Should I start from the beginning or you? No, okay. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I will better. So yes, now with the help of the world, international community, $9 billion were placed in the redoing the sarcophagus, and it was completed in 2016. So it looks much better, still not ideal, and some works are underway. And I will explain the remaining images as we go. I first heard about Chernobyl from my dad, who called me early in the morning of April 26, 1986. And he told me that there was an explosion at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station. I didn't really make anything from my dad notification. It was Saturday. I was tired. I wanted to sleep. And he called me at 6 in the morning because he heard this dire news at 5 a.m. And my dad, for years, was collecting the real information of what's going on in the Soviet Union from Voice of America or BBC. And he called me after he heard BBC News, and it was possible only at 5 a.m. because all the rest of the time, all the radio stations from abroad were jammed. But at 5 a.m., he was able to hear this. And what he heard that at 1:23 a.m. at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station, the reactor exploded. But the world didn't know anything at that time. And nobody knew except those who were very close that the radioactive particle catapulted as the rockets into this space. And because of the wind and other weather conditions, they were spread along to different northern hemisphere and other countries in Europe. So when this happened, nobody was prepared. Not even, this is an understatement, grossly unprepared to any response for radioactive event. So when the reactor exploded, the power of the steam was underestimated, and the roof of the reactor just blew up. So this is the airplane, this is a helicopter that was flown by pilots who were pretty low to the reactor crater just to have this as target and be precise in throwing dolomite and clay. And over 2 weeks, 5 tons of these materials were thrown into the reactor. What I didn't know this slide, I learned about the drug that pilots were taking. The name of the drug is Indralin. At that time, it was an experimental Soviet drug that was supposed to protect pilots from deadly effects of radiation. However, it didn't do that. What happened that, first of all, it was not effective against radiation, and second, that it caused very severe adverse events in cameramen and helicopter pilots, such as nausea, vomiting, and dramatic changes in blood pressure, which is, of course, not good for helicopter pilots. And by the way, this drug has been approved by Russian Federation in their stockpile in case of radioactive disaster or event. They have this kit, emergency kit, which contains the drug, but now the different drug is attached to this one, which supposedly will make these side effects less pronounced. What I didn't know that the crew of the helicopters consisted of pilots who came from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was taken by Soviets in 1979. When they came back, it was right around Chernobyl disaster, the Soviet government calculated that pilots who never been in the war will be afraid to fly in this mixture of radioactive particles, and they will just say no. They will lose their jobs, but they will wait their survival and against this. And they thought that only pilots who came from Afghanistan, who survived the war there, and in their opinion, they looked the death into the eyes, and they were assigned to this mission. Along with that traumatic or tragic events would happen to helicopter pilots, another event that known as the suicide mission. These are volunteers who are working on the reactor roof, because we didn't know until certain time how many radioactive debris are on the roof of the reactor. And there was no known way how to clean the reactor roof from the debris. So first, the robots that were sent from Japan, this was the first gift the Soviet government wanted to accept from abroad. At the beginning, they didn't want any help from the United States. It came later, but they agreed to have robots from Japan. So robots were trying to pick up this debris, and all the robots really burned completely burned into pieces. So when robots were destroyed, they decided that people should do the job. And some I never call biological robots, but in some literature, people call it biological robots. So they were all were volunteers, and I saw how they on TV when I was in Kiev. They showed this live, how these volunteers were selected for the job. It was probably 20 soldiers in line, and the officer asked who would like to go and volunteer, and every single person said, make step forward and said yes. So each volunteer was granted 2,000 rubles, which is $35 at that time, maybe a little more now. And they were allowed to be on the reactor roof for 90 minutes only, 90. So the order was, you go, you do your job, and you count till 90. And whatever you already done, wherever you are located on the roof, just drop everything and run away, run back, and the new group will go and help you. So this was a real suicidal mission. I don't think that any of them survived. And how they were presented, they didn't know where they're going. All the threat and danger were not elucidated by the government. And all the dosimeters, for measuring the radiation levels were confiscated. So people didn't know what are they getting into. So at that time, I worked as a pediatrician and hematologist in Kiev in one of the largest hospitals. And 2 days after, I became a team leader of the field team, which consisted of first physician responders to the Chernobyl disaster. And it was a real nightmare, each step, everything that we faced. There were children who were hysterical and traumatized. There were parents who were absolutely numb, not understanding what's going on. And there were people who were trying to help the victims, again, not knowing what's going on. So I saw people who are barefoot, were running across the radioactively contaminated sand with the stretchers to pick up victims and carry them back to it's usually helicopters who were waiting to evacuate them. So first physician responders, we worked in the dark. None of us were given the protective clothes, no instructions were given, and again, we didn't know what the dosimeter is at that time. So some first responders who were not medical personnel, they were putting fires down, and they didn't know the risk and the dangers that they are going through. They never had any preparedness plan, although there were manuals at the power station that each person must report that he or she read the manual and understand what's going on in case. And my biggest surprise was that when there was not enough internal medicine doctors to see patients at the adult clinics who were evacuated from Chernobyl, so they sent pediatricians to see adults, and it was a very interesting experience because none of us dealt with the adult patients for years and years. And the first time when I saw patients from the power station, there were 8 people in one room at 8 patients. They were not doing bad, but they all needed evaluation and possible treatment. And one man was like waving paper in front of me, and I asked, "What is this?" And he says, "Oh, you know, this is our manual. And what we had in the manual, that you should drink red wine to protect from the radiation. This was in the manual at the station." And when I asked, I couldn't believe, and I said, "Can you show me?" He said, "No, after this happened," it was before, but after this happened, we were asked just to rip all the pages where there is any references to red wine. So, yeah, so it's official information. In any case, not white wine, not vodka, please. It's just red wine. It's good. I cannot say how much. It's a different question. I am not responsible for that. So in first days and first hours and days, 28 people died of acute radiation of injuries, and mainly they acquired radiation burns. And I describe in the book how Soviets didn't envision real things that they are so obvious today. For example, the night shift at the reactor station did not have keys for the rooms with the clean and dry clothes. So only morning shift, who was supposed to come at 6 or 7 o'clock, had the key. Why? Again, they didn't think really well of any of such a severe accident. So people who worked at the station soaked in the radioactive water, and this is how they developed their burns. And the burns were severe and were the main cause of death in early days after Chernobyl. Usually when radiation burns were together with any other injury in the body. So the days after the accident, medical community realized that we need some basic knowledge. We need some training. Nobody trained us in residence, in medical school. We know nothing. So my supervisor, professor of the clinic, of the hospital where I worked, asked me to go to the library. It's a premier medical library in Kyiv, the best in Ukraine. And he asked me to gather information and give a presentation for the medical personnel on the following day. Just basic, really basic knowledge. So I went to this library, I set off for this task. And when I walked in, I was surprised by lots of shelves that were empty. And I asked the librarian that I need some literature, journals, or books about radiation. And the librarian responded, "I'm sorry." No, she didn't say I'm sorry. I'm saying it now. She said that we don't have anything available. We got an order from the above, and I knew what is above, that we must take off the shelves all the journals, all the articles or books that contain the word radiation, and they did it. So this was a default thinking of Soviet government: less knowledge, less panic. This is what they followed, and we were in the middle of that. And for this particular example, there were nothing that we could have done. Yeah, this is a really heartfelt reminds probably what's going on today, right, with evacuation, but this is from 36 years ago. The evacuation was not announced for the public until 2 weeks after the disaster. So people, I am not talking about Pripyat. Pripyat, where the station was located, was evacuated 36 hours later. But also it was a very painful process because people were waiting for the buses. They were promised that the buses will come at 9 in the morning, will get people and take them to safe location, and Kiev was one of those. Again, mistakenly, Kiev had high levels of radiation almost immediately after, but it was 90 miles from Chernobyl. That's why they decided we'll bring children, especially children, to Kiev. But the buses, some of the buses, didn't come till late night. People with children were outside. Children were playing in the radioactive sand with all these particles all day. And some of them, and I treated one of or two girls who were from Pripyat, who were in the open space for 12 hours till they get on the buses. I knew about the needs or necessity for evacuation few days after. And again, this all came through rumors, through connections with other physicians and physicists who just shared information with each other. There were no public announcement. So when I was told that it was May 1st, when this May 1st demonstration was encouraged, so people, Gorbachev, who was in charge at that time, father of Glasnost, was saying publicly, all fine, everybody should go the May parade. And we lived in the center of the city, and this parade came before our building, and my daughter was 3 years old at that time, and to entertain her, I put her on the windowsill and she was watching. And when I was in the US, 10 years later, I learned that no, you cannot be close to the window if anything like this happening, just stay inside the room. So when I teaching courses for medical students, I usually say, just don't fight for the office with the window. Just in case, yeah. So this is, again, another take-home message. So my daughter was evacuated 6 days after the disaster. And as I mentioned before, the official order came 10 to 14 days after. And she was lucky. We had her aunt lived in Kharkiv. And again, it's such a, I don't have a word, that Kharkiv at that time was one of the safest city because radiation plume did not even touch it. It just went around. And today, knowing the situation in Ukraine, Kharkiv is one of the most dangerous cities. But at that time, we knew again through rumors. My neighbor who worked at the Institute of Physics smuggled the map with the numbers that would correspond to the level of radioactive contamination of different areas. So Kharkiv was very good areas. And my daughter was supposed to go there with one of her grandmothers. But what happened, this was a story overlaps with the potassium iodide that at that time there were no directions when to give it, how to give it, and what the dose. So people rushed to the pharmacies and started started buying potassium iodine, not knowing how to use it. And some of them fed children with this iodine to the point that kids develop gastric ulcers and bleeding. And I saw these cases when I was called to the emergency room. So I was hesitant, should I give my daughter potassium or not? And I couldn't make the decision. And again, there were protocols for potassium iodine, but none of us knew about them. So I went to this pharmacy, I got this liquid, and when I opened it, and I got the whole dropper filled with iodine, but when I felt the smell, I said to myself, no, I don't want to give it to my daughter, it's horrible. So I emptied the dropper and I put it in the little glass and put it on the top of the cabinets. But my daughter, who liked to play doctor, although she was 3, when nobody was in the room, she wanted to spot what's there. So she climbed and she reached the dropper, and as a future doctor, she thought she knew where to put. So she started touching her nose with basically empty dropper, but the vapors of iodide still were there, and she developed severe allergic reaction to iodide. And then as she has tearing of her eyes and coughing, was horrible. And this was the day before she was supposed to go overnight train. So before, always there were checkpoint before you get on the train, you show your ticket. On that day, all the tickets, these rules did not exist. Nobody checked tickets. And people who did not have tickets, they just start begging the passengers who were already on the train to take their children anywhere to the secure location. And this was an absolutely horrific scene that I watched. And when I came with my daughter just to say goodbye to this train carriage, on each seat there were few, maybe 4 to 5 kids, years between 5 and 14, not accompanied by parents. So those children were just going with strangers, and parents didn't know when they're going to see their kids again. So 2 weeks after Soviet leader Gorbachev first talked about what happened, and his words were that the worst is behind us. But this was a wrong statement, because the worst was just in front of us, and we already knew that. There are many health consequences from Chernobyl. And for years, the scientific literature was filled with research and data, mainly about cancer and leukemia. And that's what doctors were focusing on, and also predicted some long-term consequences. But for years, I never heard about psychological, that anybody in the US, I was already in this country, I left 3 years after the Chernobyl happened in 1989. And all the knowledge that I acquired was in the United States, and nobody talked about psychological impact until 2005. I attended the meeting in Switzerland, in Geneva. It was a WHO meeting. And I have to say that my management and leadership in the place where I was working, and 3 representatives are here, and many of them not here, but I'm grateful that they sent me every year to one of the international meetings where I shared what I learned about radiation, where I work, and lessons from Chernobyl, and the international community shared their knowledge, and this was all very productive. So for the first time, in 2005, when I was at this meeting, the opening slide said, you can read, the largest health problem is mental health problem. And then I became aware and started digging into this, and it's this knowledge very useful for any disasters. It was the same problem with COVID. It will be the same consequences with the current situation. So psychological impact is a huge, huge consequences, and it's mainly manifest in depression, anxiety. People lost their friends, their houses, their jobs, and level of suicide went up, alcoholism level went up, and this is what happened with, again, I want to emphasize this, with each disaster. So not just medical community, but general public must have this awareness. So I'm wrapping part one of my book, and I want to finish that for 3 years after the Chernobyl disaster, I continued to take care of children who were either lived in Kiev and developed some blood diseases or cancer related to radiation, or there were children who were evacuated from the vicinity of Pripyat and Chernobyl. So this concludes part one of my book. Part two, I will go faster. So in summer of 1989, 4 generations of my family, my grandmother, mother-in-law, myself, my husband and daughter, left the Soviet Union. And I called there were 7 of us, and I called them Magnificent 7. If anybody has why that, I will explain during Q&A. But Chernobyl, the bureaucratic lies about Chernobyl and cover up were the last straw why my family immigrated. The years or decades of anti-Semitism and persecution of Jews that all generation of my family, including myself, experienced, led us to pack our lives, and we left. So each of the immigrants was allowed to take no more than 40-pound possessions and $90 in cash per person. Our escape route took us through Austria, where we spent 10 days, and then we went to Italy. It was the traditional way, immigration route. And in Italy, our family spent 6 months, absolutely unexpected. We thought we are there, we're just Roman holidays, and 1 month we are in the US. But I will explain what was the problem, why so many people were waiting for their permission to get to the United States for months and months, and our family was one of it. So the 6 months in 2 most beautiful countries were the most difficult months in my life. So definitely not Roman holidays. There were 6,000 to 8,000 people, Soviet Jews, who were stalled in Italy without knowing whether we ever get to the United States. So this was really an extraordinary journey where representatives of each generation had their questions. My grandmother's generations would ask, can we ever get to the United States or we will die here? My generation had different question. Are we ever be able to find a job in the US? And children had their question. My daughter's favorite was, how can we get me an ice cream if we don't have money? And this is what pretty much every kid was really, really concerned. But over the years, all the questions were answered, and all people who were stuck in Italy for 6 to 8 months were allowed to go to the United States. And why it first was the rejection, or they called us Italian refusnik. Usually refusnik was applicable to people who were not allowed to leave the Soviet Union in the 70s. But in Italy, we were same, but Italian refusniks. And the reason was that United States did not expect so many refugees, and they did not have enough money to settle them all. So they made these strict rules that each person who left the former Soviet Union must prove some persecution. And people tried, but it still didn't work for many because just no money. Only in November of 1989, the Congress passed Lautenberg Amendment. And what Lautenberg Amendment said that every person who left the Soviet Union is considered a refugee. And 40,000 people were left in 1989, but only 32,000 United States had money to settle and help 32,000. So 8,000 people were those who relied on a different help. And Jewish communities across America did a tremendous job. They gave money and all the help, and they resettled everybody who wanted to be there. So you might remember this maybe funny image that looked like a pretzel. So my family, on the cover slide, so my family settled in Santa Marinella, which is a picturesque suburbs of Rome. And before all Soviet refugees start settling there, this place was known as a wonderful place where Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini had their love story and where they married and then stayed after. But for us, it was not that topic. This, what I showed in the first slide, what looks like pretzels, they started, the industry in Santa Marinella started manufacturing, producing, baking these pretzels, and they called them wheels of immigration. They were very popular. I honestly don't know why I don't like them, but I didn't like them, but they were very cheap and it was a snack. So people really like it. I wanna go. I'm sorry, I'm running. We can stop it anytime, but you please tell me when it's enough, okay? Okay, so on the left, this is the image of the house where a family of 7 of us lived. It really looked like a train. No windows, but no windows and no doors. 7 of us lived there, and of course, each conversation was, got through the whole train to the whole house, and this was not very nice. That some conversations that my family members each were very opinionated, and what they said, sometimes you didn't want other family members to hear, but this was not the case. It just went very, very smoothly through this. And these flimsy curtains no, sorry, the flimsy curtains just, of course, didn't contain any sound, and we know very well who is who in this family. So, image on the left, and I have my best friend, Dr. Feldman here, who will back up, he's here, she will back up my story. She also went through similar journey with her family. But people who, the refugees in Italy had no income whatsoever. Nobody offered any jobs, and people, especially those who had, who made good living, who had high positions in their past life, were really ashamed that they cannot contribute anything to their families. And I felt the same way, but I couldn't do anything about that. Just nobody hired us. However, there were some jobs for PhDs, for top physicians, top musicians, like digging wells along the sea or spreading manure. And these jobs were open. So people who spent all their lives sitting in their offices and doing some intellectual job inside, when they were offered the job outside, they really acted like they have some mental problems. They just didn't know what to do. So when first year in the US, Irene and I met a physician, her name is Lena, it's a real story, who also went through Italy with her husband and 2 kids, no income. And Lena decided that her personality was, I want to do what I want to do. I have my opinion. I don't need any supervision. So she came to one of the beautiful cafe in Italy with the view of the sunset time, and she told the owner of the cafe belonged to the Italian family. And she made the story that she was a waitress in the Soviet Union, and she did this for many years, and she would like that they hire her as a waitress. And the owner of the place said, yeah, okay, you can start. If you know what you're doing, you can start. The whole cafe belonged to Italian family, and they were all very friendly. They treated Lena very nicely. She got the orders from the customers, not knowing Italian at all, not a single word, but she somehow got an orders. And then Italian family helped her put on the tray everything that was in the order. Moreover, they even attached little tags, so when she's distributing the dishes, she knows where it goes. But so they put the whole tray with the steamy plates on it, and she took in one hand, it's not her, it's just the supportive image. She took the tray in one hand and graciously started walking to the table. But the owner of the restaurant, he had some suspicion, and he was watching her. So everything went well until she came to the table. And she dropped on the table, between the glasses, some of them fell. She dropped the tray with the steamy plates right on the table. So the owner who was watching her, then everything was like in a silent movie. He ran out of his hiding to save the reputation of his restaurant, and he immediately nicely placed everything on the table, and Lena was in the kitchen impatiently waiting what is next. So the owner didn't speak English, didn't speak Russian, but with the body language, it was pretty clear, so she understood everything. And when he was making these moves, she said, I did it because every waiter, she didn't blink, and she said every waiter did the same in Ukraine. That's how we were trained. And the owner said, but look, there is a table. This table where you put your, she ignored completely because she didn't know there was a table where she put the dishes and they started serving them. So of course she was fired before, like she was hired even. And then we met her here and she got her medical degree, medical recertification, and she was practicing internal medicine in Texas. This is the last I heard from her. Okay, maybe I will wrap up. I told what how refugees. I will skip this. I will skip this one, okay, because we don't have time. But if you're interested, I can come back to this later. So when I came to the United States, I had my recertification and relicensing, and as the moderator mentioned, the places where I completed my training. And then for 3 years, I worked at the FDA, the oncology office, and then after it was September 11, the FDA was charged to open, at that time it was Division of Counterterrorism, then it grew into office, and my beloved team leader is here and in the first row, and another member, wonderful, who was responsible for emergency operation. On the back, I see Honey. Without her, I won't be here because she was the one who introduced me to this place. So my dream to help people how to develop drugs against radiation exposure, which I carried from the days of Chernobyl, never thought that this dream will ever come true. It came through here at the FDA, and I worked with the counterterrorism staff for 17 years. And the office has an absolutely unique goal and purpose to help pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, academia, private investigators to develop safe and effective drugs against radiation exposure in humans. So I think that I can complete my presentation. I retired from the FDA for 2.5 years, but my passion still is my mission. I work as a consultant and advisory board member for 2 different pharmaceutical companies that developing drugs against the radiation exposure. So thank you very much, and I apologize it was too emotional and I went over time.
Thank you so much, Alla, for presenting this. It was a very emotional and really heartwarming story. So we're going to do a question and answer now. So if you have a question, please say your first name and your question.
I'm Bonnie. Oops, thanks. I'm Bonnie. Hi.
Hi.
And I wondered when you and your family were leaving the Soviet Union, when you finally made that decision, how hard was it to actually get permission to leave?
Oh, from the Soviet Union?
Yes.
This was a time when Gorbachev opened all the doors that were closed before. Their first wave of immigration was in the 70s. People left, and then nobody was allowed to go, and all the dissidents went to jail. But when Gorbachev got to power, he was like, I don't care if anybody who wants to go, go. And we grabbed that opportunity. And the time when my family left, we basically were the last echelon, because after us, there was no this possibility. People who were able to leave, they had to have families in the US. We didn't have anybody, so we just left. but for the rules were different, and there was no this route through Europe. There were direct flights to the United States, but it did not affect us. We just were lucky.
Other questions? Please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Okay. I'm going to pass my tea. Oh, okay. Yes, I'll come around. Thank you.
My name is Tom. In all transparency, I'm a past colleague of Alla's. We've probably known each other for maybe 2 decades. I don't know, close to it anyway.
We're younger than that. Right, you're
pardon me for
right.
mentioning the age component there, right?
No, you're right.
Right. So I'm also, I deal with radiation. So when I read your book, knowing about radiation in Chernobyl, I kind of pushed the radiation part of her book aside. And what I enjoyed about Alla's book is I learned about Alla. And so my question to you, Alla, is this was a story to me of a very strong woman. So can you tell me what quality in you helped you to pursue this journey of starting out with this disaster at Chernobyl and getting your family to the United States and the achievements that you've done today?
Well, thank you, Tom. I thought you knew all that. Well, I think I am greatly, appreciate what my family did for me since I was a child. So what my parents seeded in me, I still have, I still carry. And what they always said to me, you are a Jewish person, and in order for you to get to good school, to get to good college, to get a good job, you have to know 10 times more than some other person would do. And my mom would wake me up on Saturday when I was in middle school, high school, 7 or 8 in the morning, and I always was wondering, what do you want from me? She said, no, get up and go study. I said, no, today is Saturday. Do your homework. I said, I don't have any homework. Then go and do reading. So this was how I think this is a big part of that. And examples what my family went through, it's also told me that they did it for my generation, and I want to do it for my daughter's generation. I didn't want her to go through the same repression, the same horrors and injustice that we went through. So, and people who know me probably would agree that humor, as a doctor, I see humor as one of the best medicine, and this helps me a lot to overcome even very humorless situations with humor.
Oh, okay.
Hi, my name's David. I'm sure you look at the current news coming out of Eastern Europe with a unique eye. I'm curious, as you think back, do you feel that you could see the seeds of the current conflict from your time? In other words, could you anticipate that this could
never
be happening now?
Never even close to that, because what's happening now, it's absolutely unbelievable. And I am glued to the TV, I am reading news, I am talking to people, and even when they're telling me what's going on, like firsthand, I get briefings from my neighbors who still live in Kiev every morning, and I cannot believe what they're saying. No, absolutely not. At that time, when I grew up in the Soviet Union, and I left when the wall fell, and each country, each republic became so-called independent. But my worries always were that people within the Soviet Union, they don't like each other. This was my feeling forever, that Ukrainians don't like Russians, Russians don't like Ukrainians, but they have to be, civilized, and they have to support each other, because for economical reasons, and some families have relatives. My family had lots of relatives in Russia, and each family was this way. No, never, ever.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So I'm going to come on around here.
Thank you so much. My name is Patty, and I'd like to ask you about the current fires at the nuclear power stations in Ukraine and what you think is the danger there.
Yeah, Ukraine has currently 16 nuclear power stations. Their design is much better than Chernobyl power station. Chernobyl was absolutely flawed design and operated but by untrained, poorly trained personnel. So I don't want to speculate, but what happened, for example, looking back, 10 days back, what happened at Chernobyl, when Russian tanks start going through the area around Chernobyl, the radiation levels start going up, not too high, not dangerous level, but this happened because now radiation is under the soil, it's deep in the ground, and when it gets disturbed or lifted, any word explains, then radiation goes up. So if nobody will be having fights around Chernobyl, if there is no missile or any other military device which will melt the core of the reactor, then there is really no danger, because reactor has many different parts, and maybe your neighbor from the left, Colonel Jarrett, will correct me, but I learned 3 words: keep cool, keep water, keep rods cool, right? So keep the rods cool, yes. And rods are in the middle, so if there is nothing hitting the core of the reactor, then electricity there, the water is going down, right? The temperature is getting down, so there is no real danger. But again, if it's some of the hypersonic missile or drone hit the core of the reactor, then it could be even worse than Chernobyl, because war contributed to the situation. And people who are, as of today, Ukrainian army is safeguarding the reactor, but they are under the gun from the Russian army. And if they, God forbid, do something not what they want, or if there is a siren and everybody has to go into the hiding, then reactor is not, nobody is watching it. And I know that the personnel of the reactor have sleepless nights, long shifts, and this is also contributes to less of their concentration and attention.
Thank you so much, Alla Shapiro, for being here today and sharing your story. I'm sure like everyone here, an hour is not enough to hear this story, to learn about your incredible life. I want to thank all of you for being here today and asking such great questions. So can we give another round of applause to Alla Shapiro, please? Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
And
I
I
never had this as AFDA, this is for sure. A round of applause.
Yes. I just want to let everybody know that tomorrow we have another event related to Ukraine. It is our benefit concert. The in-person program is currently sold out, but the virtual program you can join and donate to United Ukraine. So thank you again, everybody, for coming.